Rabbit Hole podcast. We are back, and we're back with a bit of a new format.
Ooh.
Yeah, so look, this is an extension of the normal podcast that we do, which has been predominantly current affair news related.
Correct.
I think the only difference that we're going to do now is explore one topic at a time and maybe not necessarily point it towards the news and go in a bit more deeper. I did.
Say.
No, I did say that. You heard correct.
It's just, the thoughts and feelings and emotions of just two people just trying to, make sense of the world.
Exactly. So going down the rabbit hole. So look, our first topic that we're going to discuss is something that, we've been talking about. Look, you're checking yourself out in the camera,
Well, I don't approve of this lighting still, just saying.
Okay, all right. Okay, cool. So the topic today at hand is the changing values of work for millennials.
It might also be I'm checking myself out because it's like this is clearly a grab for corporate gear, but also comfy because it's very cold here at the moment.
So the changing values of work for millennials. We're millennials.
Yeah.
Well, why do you say it like that?
Well, time.
Time indeed. All right, what's the age group of millennials again?
It's just no, wait, hold on, let me finish. It's just this thing of like, it is fascinating to see as time goes on and how people evolve into, whatever life stage they're at, and then what needs they may have, therefore the ever-changing kind of needs and values of us in the workforce. It's just very fascinating to just kind of think about this stuff, right? We're now at the age where, cancel me, bloody Gen Z, if I'm saying this, but adulting is real, okay?
Okay, so millennial...
Very real.
The millennial...
It's hard.
Age range is from 28 to 43.
That's a big range.
It is a big range.
That's a big range.
It is a big range. I mean, if you're closer to 40...
There's different definitions, though, for like all different age
well,
types
millennials
of that,
are generally considered to be born between 81 and 1996. That means that
that checks out, actually.
That's the definition.
I'm used to the year definition as opposed to the age definition. And then when you think about it, you kind of, us speaking.
Yeah.
We do tend to get to vibe with like, the older millennials, I guess you could say, because
you're right, because 28, heck, if we were 28 again, 28 to 43 is a big range.
It's a big range.
Because if you're a millennial that's at 28, I can't even remember 28. It's like, what were you doing at 28? You feel like you have time, right?
Yeah.
Time for what? I don't know, but you felt like
you're not 30 yet. You're still relatively young. If not, you're the most evolved that you've ever been. And, you've been in the workforce for, I'm going to say, depending on when you've started, 4 to 7 years.
Do you think 30 is the inflection point? That once you hit the big 30, then it's like, oh.
It's the inflection point. Well, no, it's the inflection point for all age and experience. I always say age is experience, right?
Yeah. Not all experience.
Partially to make people feel better about their age because they get self-conscious. But genuinely, like, it is experience because that's what comes with it, right? Mm. And I think when you're 30, like, you remember when you turn 30, right? It's that, that's a different conversation.
Memory loss is
for a different day.
But
it's a big milestone, and it kind of, I think what it does, it causes you to reflect on where you're at, or where you've been, where you're at now, where you want to go next, because it's like, oh, we're not messing around anymore, right?
We remember 21. Everyone remembers 21 when 21st were a thing. Funnily enough, I remember that, like the 21st birthday party.
Of course you do.
But yeah, 30th is interesting. Okay, let's orient it back to the topic at hand, which is the changing values of work for millennials. I mean, we were having like a conversation about this, but you've heard the old adage, I'm going to get it wrong, but yeah, that work is supposed to, you live to work, not work to live. You've heard that adage, right?
No, you don't live to work,
well,
you work to live.
Well, presumably, right?
Yeah.
And it's usually a phrase said when people place a lot of, your work is almost everything, which for certain generations, and maybe let's talk about the millennial perspective, I'm not saying that that's completely gone away, but for a long time, I think we're that generation. Look, we definitely agree that for the boomer generation, by the way, this is our opinion on things, right? We're going to go through generalizations, which obviously don't reflect, everyone's viewpoint on it. But generally, you could say that the boomer generation was probably one of the last generations that, what am I trying to say? That really emphasized that element of
Working hard.
I'm not going to say working hard, but staying in a company for a long period of time, doing the hard
loyalty.
yards, progression, hierarchy, just what you think of work in a very traditionalist sense, right?
Loyalty, but also getting really good at one thing.
The depth, right?
Yeah.
So millennials, us, we were that first generation. You remember back in the day when millennial bashing was a thing, right? Now the Gen Ys are getting the spotlight, and that which was
Gen Z, you mean?
Gen Z. Sorry, millennials, Gen Y. It was like millennials, Gen Ys. They're out of touch. They don't work hard. They demand, etc., etc. Everything that the Gen Zs are getting, right? So yeah, how do you think the perspective of work has changed for millennials? How has it changed for you?
Again, I think with age, you start to get a better understanding of what you want to do and what you value, and therefore it shifts naturally by virtue of values being changing,
So what's
right?
shift? How will we shifted, do you think?
I think it's a matter of what interests you, what you're good at, what you value. And if I think about it this way, so like, look, I've had a career. I ick at the fact when I say I've had a career, because I don't feel old enough to say that I've had a career, but I actually have had a career.
Yep.
Where I started off at a media agency. I went over to sales side for a bit. I landed on client side, and now I'm in consulting.
Yep.
And
So we're both, just to put it out there, white collar, and that's just going to orient the conversation.
And if I look back at my
career,
21-year-old self, without incriminating age or anything, I was dead set wanting to be working in advertising.
Yeah.
I wanted to be strategist. I wanted to create these campaigns. That was the goal for me. And then eventually wanted to be, CEO of a media agency,
that. Why
right?
did you want to do that, like strategy and all that?
Because I find it interesting. I find it, it's a good mix of, this is going to sound really weird, but the art and science.
No, that makes sense. So it's the sexy stuff, right? Like if you come out of it, well, it is. If you come out, like, so I did a marketing degree, and when I went out, I wanted to work in fast moving consumer goods. That was everyone wanted to do that.
But like client side, right?
Yeah. Procter and Gamble, or Unilever, everyone wanted to. Coles, like I got all the way. I tell this story to your boredom, but and why? Because it was quote unquote the sexy stuff. No one that I knew that with a university degree wanted to do sales. No one wanted to do partnerships, which I am in now. Like, no, you don't do a university degree to sell stuff. Like it's not deemed the sexy stuff. The sexy stuff, depending on what field you're in, is creative.
Yeah.
Ironically.
Going back, right?
Yeah.
You know how people say, "Oh, you never if you study marketing." If you end up in marketing, it's usually sometimes you don't study to get into marketing. It's a weird saying, like people or agency life or whatever. Yeah. And I'm like, I studied marketing to get into that industry. And I think it's because if I'm going to hark back to my younger self, like watching ads, like I was a couch potato baby. Don't get it twisted, right? I liked watching like ads because it was stories. Sometimes, I mean, not as good as now probably, but there was an aspect of, it's these little mini videos of like they're trying to convince us of something, communicate something, and it was entertainment sometimes, right? So I've always liked something like that, and I think it's look, Look, maybe it's just the ability to kind of find a way to connect to people. Like if we're trying to find it on an altruistic level, that's why I'm trying to not say like sexy stuff, because there is an aspect to it. It's about what you see,
We all want
because
the
what you
glamorous
see is what you like, what you want sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just that's always just been something that I wanted to do, and I think over the period of time, because of things changing, i.e. you want to progress, you want to you're bored of your current work, you need a new challenge, which is different to being bored of your work specifically. Like for all those types of reasons, I think that's where your value changes when it comes to your career, because is it that I don't want to say that strictly millennials.
But what about,
I don't want to say, sorry, let me get to my point.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that millennials like particularly value like, progress and growth. Like, not that that's any different to any other generation.
you're saying they do or they don't?
No, they do.
Yeah.
But like, I don't want to make it sound like that's like, oh, we're the only generation that does that. Because that's not the case. Like, I don't think it's the case, but it's probably a prevalent characteristic that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think so. I think taking like my personal story there, I'm actually trying to really dig into the archives. I think because I did 2 degrees, right? I did a marketing, was it arts? Nah, it was organizational psychology, arts.
Organizational psychology
and marketing, yeah.
Really?
Makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
We can talk about other things.
It sounds sexy because it's psychology.
Yeah,
but
it is interesting. It's a 100-level unit of psych. But anyway, thinking back, I think Gen Y, millennials, we were born at a very interesting intersection of time. Again, you had the boomers there that were probably the last of a generation that really valued or placed a lot of value in working for a company for a long period of time.
Boomers are different to Gen X, though.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure that like
we're
getting to that,
So-
because we keep talking about boomers and it's like, well, no, but Gen X is probably the one
in
before
between.
us.
Yeah.
Boomers.
Well, see-
boomers were in the war.
No, I get it. I'm gonna generally put them together, but I get what you're saying, right? So the reason I say that is, even though millennials would you say millennials are the first digital natives? I'd say they were, to be honest.
Oh yeah.
Now,
as in
because Facebook, Instagram, all TikTok, especially those stuff were just coming. Maybe not TikTok, but like definitely Facebook, right?
Look, like, and I'm always going to err on the side of like, you have to respect the context of where things are at, right? Like Gen X was probably like the technology shift.
Yeah.
But Gen Y is probably where, like Millennium, 2000, Y2K. Everyone remember that?
Everyone talks about Gen Z being digital natives, but we're probably the first of it. I think depends on how you define digital natives. I can see there, but like we were at the forefront of the impact of this spilling over, right?
And when we say at the forefront, it's like we're the ones that were experiencing it kind of
it,
the
right?
most, in the sense of like obviously other generations were experiencing it as well, but then we're kind of growing with it.
Yeah.
That's what I think we want to say.
Yeah, we were kind of figuring out what everything was. And what is the spillover to work? Well, you come into a workplace where, harkening back to my journey specifically, I did another degree because I was straight in the GFC, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. So I wanted a job. A career. I wanted a job, right? Yeah. So I've done 1 degree, and in Australia they have a program called HEX where you have to pay it back. It's great. I know a lot of countries you have to take a personal loan for that. So absolutely privileged to do 1 entire degree and then get told that no one is hiring for your degree, marketing, because marketing departments were the first getting hired. So I went into the workforce having an idea, and when you're in a high school, you have, it's changed now, but tell me about yourself. In high school, once you started year 10, 11, and definitely 12, you had to, if you were not there and maybe you're not going to take a trade, you had to decide what career path you were going to do, right? You're forced to make some level of a decision.
Some
there,
level
right?
of a decision.
Some
yeah.
level of a decision there. And for me, it was always business. All right. So I gravitated towards business. It was business and IT, quite a general like predicament that like a lot of like Southeast Asians or like go through, either business or IT. Definitely not arts, definitely not music, not for us at least. And I went towards business because I was scoring pretty good marks in it, and I always loved that side of it, right? So
It's if you're not a doctor, you're a lawyer, and
You're
if
a
you're not a
you're
lawyer,
a disappointment.
you're a disappointment. And what's the closest thing that is, somewhat close to those two? Business.
And even within business, if you think about it, marketing is, I wouldn't say the poor man's business, but like I didn't have the
It is
intellectual.
accounting,
Yeah, exactly.
finance,
right? Like that's the prestigious stuff, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I went in deciding pretty quick in years 10 to 12 that marketing was going to be it. Getting a marketing degree, like scraping enough UAI, remember that? All that shit, like Shazam, back in the day. Shazam. All that shit. So I'm just going to say it. To get a mark, got into Macquarie University. Very happy. Prestigious business university in Australia.
wasn't as high profile as it is now at the time.
You think it's more high profile now?
I think so.
I think it was. Anyway, whatever. So all good. Got that in. Finished my degree. Not the highest marks, not the worst marks. Just let's call it. I'm not going to tell what my average was, but like got enough to definitely get a job.
Yeah.
Smack bang in the GFC to be told that no one is hiring marketers and your graduate program intake has been slashed 75% because we have to keep accountants. We have to keep all of those guys, but marketing is supplementary. Cool. So then dynamically, what do you do? Well, the smart person in me that has been given the opportunity to have HEX again, a government program to take on debt, decides to take on some more debt into something that I wasn't technically proficient in, accounting. Why? Literally, I'll tell you why I went.
Yeah.
Let me just finish this. Remember the old seek.com.au?
Yeah.
Do you remember when you would go to the homepage, it would literally have every subvertical?
Yeah.
Accounting would be number one, A, C, C. In
Just based on alphabetical order.
But the alphabetical order to number, it would have the amount of accounting jobs
Yeah,
there.
and it'd be
Always
always
the
the
most.
No, my question is, did you get to that decision yourself, or were like
This is myself.
this is yourself?
This is myself.
This is not like
This is
any
not
kind
parents,
of
right?
parents or anything.
And this is an individual journey. People go through these journeys themselves. And in hindsight, I often have this conversation to myself because I've just recently paid off both of these degrees in my HEX, right? So the funny thing about HEX is it's good. I mean, like I would not want to be in the US where you have to pay a personal loan off the bat, 100%. But you don't know the impact of HEX until you start earning money and you start seeing.
That's not as high as I thought it was going to be. Yeah.
The best aspect of this is actually when you start getting pay rises. And then when you actually see these pay rises not necessarily normally flow through because the indexation starts getting higher. Anyway, so long way of saying that I wasn't even in the mode of thinking about a career. I wanted a job and I was willing to pivot. I was willing to pivot how many times to get a job, and I got a job pretty quickly at accounting, and I'm no longer in accounting. Go on.
You know what was interesting, right? So there was this study that just came out recently. It's called the Life Chances Study, which studied 167 babies that were born in 1990 and just understanding the impact of like income, ethnic background, education on their lives for people who are now in their 30s, right? They had a specific point about the GFC, right? So noting that if you were born in 1990, you were 18 at the time. And so this is at the apex of you're in HSC, you finish HSC potentially.
Yep.
And you're thinking about what does that look like? And they made this point about specifically with this segment, which was men from low income families. They were saying that by the time they were 24, 80% of the participants were in paid jobs, but 2 out of the 5 were not working in their preferred industry. That idea of something that is completely out of your control that you then have to react to just as a means of, well, if we're looking at the hierarchy, the hierarchy of needs, like we just need food, we need we need shelter, we need stability. Like it's all of these things, right? And also for the fact that, let's not get it twisted as well, right? Like you were still probably living at home.
Yeah.
Whereas some other people were either living out, via uni
So they had to
institutions
pay
and stuff
for
like
rent
that.
and all that sort of stuff, right?
It's just interesting. Like it's something like that can like, you just got to roll with the punches, and like how you did, like you're just finding something that's, okay, what's most in demand that I can apply myself to. It's not necessarily what I love, but we just got to get it like working, right?
No, you're right. This is my journey, and it's unique to me. I'm not saying that everyone went through this sort of journey, but the GFC was a time for a lot of people, and that's why I said millennials 28 to 40. That's a range. So I'm closer to the back end of that range than the closer.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother.
You're mid. You're
that
mid.
Does not bother me at all.
You're
right?
mid. You're actually you're
I know.
factually
Yeah,
mid.
yeah. And the reason I'm saying that,
Cut that. Put that in the socials.
actually mid. Jesus Christ. All I'm saying that is that the younger spectrum of that probably didn't get the brunt of that GFC that we're talking about, that because they were in university. They were kind of insulated to not having to make that decision to find a job at that time, right? And they came out of it, right?
Arguably me.
Arguably you.
Arguably me.
So what I'm saying is, for that cohort, they may have circumvented having to make that decision and having the singular degree and getting maybe the job in the industry initially that they wanted, right?
I will
not.
say this. I will say this.
Yeah.
No joke. I also was one of those people that wanted to get an internship at like the Unilevers
Yeah.
and big brands and whatnot.
Yep.
Did I want to be in media agency life first? No. But that was just something that just came up because, when in the course that I was studying, they said they offered internships, and then I just followed that opportunity, because how else are you going to break into that when the preferences for certain talent, and I'm going to say talent now, based on other characteristics that are outside of your control, be it where you studied, be it, not going to lie, your ethnicity, and how you present well at that point of time based on your, like, I guess, soft skills at that point of time. It's a real thing, and it can be a barrier at times, right?
Yep. No, definitely. And all the jobs that people wanted. I mean, this same dynamic is present now, right? This is not only...
It will always be the same thing. Yeah.
People are going to be fighting for those same roles, right? But to talk the changing values, we were that demographic that came in, that faced that element of the GFC, that either had to pivot and find a different role simply to get into the workforce, or maybe you were one of the select minority that got into your graduate courses, your programs, whatever you wanted, and were off to the races, right? So fast forward to now, 2024, a lot of fast forwarding happening there. But now we're in the world of AI. We're in the world of PC post-COVID. And I think that this is a generalist statement, but the values, if you talk to a lot of millennials now, and millennials now are either you're in two camps, you're having a family, you're starting to have a family. So all that conversation, you go through your 21st birthdays, you go to your 30th birthdays, all your friends are either now starting to have families, starting to have financial commitments such as houses and that. Maybe they're coming back from their secondments overseas, or some of them aren't. And you're having to put a line in the sand in terms of maybe what you want your lifestyle to do. And some of those conversations that early on, which were so far disconnected, i.e. family at all, push there, now they're coming to a forefront, right? So I think what I've seen, and this is personally what media has perpetuated this, but it's definitely something that, the more we talk to people in our social sort of group, it's definitely happening there, is two major things. One is the understanding that, and it's always been there, but it's now in the forefront, that work is simply one part of your identity, right?
Yeah.
It's a big part, by the way. Like, it's 50, depending on how many hours in a day you
spend
work.
a third to a half of your day there.
So it's a big part, right? But I think COVID was big for this. And if you are fortunate enough to work in a white collar environment, which allowed you to work at home, you are thrust into an environment where your home was part of your workplace, and it created a lot of weird behaviors. But it, I think, created a yearning and understanding from people that, hey, I can do this. Again, if you're one of the few individuals that had a job that could translate to working offsite, and or hey, maybe this is my preference.
Yeah.
Hey, that 2 hours a day of traveling and commuting, that is so much time. I multiply those 2 hours by 5, 10, 10 by 4, 40, 40 by 12, 500 hours, just under 500 hours.
Or the, productivity. Like, there's cases for and against about being in the office and collaboration in person versus versus virtually. But even then it's like, I don't get as distracted as much like I do in the office as opposed to at home.
Yeah.
So I feel like I get more done.
Yeah. But then there's the need to collaborate and to be honest, you can see it on both sides, right?
100%. And there is many companies are now facing that challenge of finding what that balance is, in order to, in light of, I guess, in some industries it's becoming really hard. Like, the costs are becoming a bit much versus, I guess, looking after the value proposition for current employees and future employees to remain relevant in the workforce, right? It's all of these things where it's just, you're right. It's with COVID, it's kind of that weird thing. If you look at GFC to how we felt kind of like, we don't have any kind of level playing field in this, right? Or like anything to kind of influence. And now with post-COVID, it's the enablement that it has kind of given us when you're trying to make light of a bad situation and what it brought to people to realize, and let's not also, like, let's think about it, right? It's a matter of beforehand you would come into you go to work, you do maybe some long hours and you have to come home and then you're still having to figure out how to socialize and how to kind of fit everything of your life into like the one day, right? But now you're having that choice of, well, hold on, what's good for me? What do I value more? Versus having to feel like you have to do everything. Yeah.
Do you personally feel that? Like, because I know you place a lot of emphasis on like your job, which a lot of people do. Like there's pride in their role and like progression in that. Do you feel that it's in that same percentage, or do you feel like there's been an awareness in terms of the other part of life, I guess?
Oh, it's been huge. It's
so you do feel it, right?
Yeah. It's look, if I've applied it, it's probably a different story.
Yeah.
At the best of times.
I mean, the realization is important itself, right?
But it's I think what it is. This is probably the other, like, coming from where we were to where we are now, right? Yeah. You go in as a young one. And you're trying to prove yourself in the world, and you're trying to, you have a certain way of thinking how things are done, but there's other, like, there's bosses, there's other people, there's the competitive nature of, like, how do I differentiate myself? How do I make myself the best? If you value that stuff, by the way. Right?
Which a lot of people do.
Because I think it's a matter of, like, you don't want to be at the, the entry level type of jobs or the mid, like, type of jobs for, again, like, if you value that. And then you get to this stage, and so you put yourself into your work, because that's like, how do you get better at what your job is, or how do you find opportunities to grow yourself to then be, I don't know, recognized as like a top tier talent or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And then it gets to the point where you're like, oh, well, why am I spending all of this time toiling myself over for something if I don't get recognized for the value that I bring? Because let's be real as well. In the workforce are different things. It's not just hard work and good ethic at times. Like that's not the one key thing that criteria that will separate you from everyone else. It's also how do you present yourself in the workplace? How do you get along with people? How do you the different skills that are needed and that are valued by bosses that, then promote certain other people. So you get to that point where you're thinking like, the adage of living to work versus working to live. And then I think you get to that point of realization where it's just, maybe it's a yearning for a simpler time.
Yeah.
Where you're not having to worry about, bills and, politics in the workforce and, I deserve this or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And then I think you start rationalizing in your head, what do I care about? What if this is what if this is what the minimum is, and if I'm fine with that, like what does that look like for people? Because
Yeah.
you get into the spectrum of different people and what they value. You get high achievers, you get people who just want to get the paycheck, you get people who may not even know what they want yet, and they're just kind of just going through the motions of understanding what does opportunity look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's true. That's true. And I think COVID brought about a real sense, and work was definitely one big element of it, but just people's, what do you call it? It was a point in time that really made us think about what was important in life. Because you had a lot of people asking existential questions about like, what is the genuine purpose? And I think the millennials are in this, and Gen Zs, which we're going to talk about next, are really going to be in this, where the understanding of a typical career that Gen X, did you say? Had in terms of working 10 years in a company, which is another thing you don't really see in millennials. Like I'm close to that, and that's an aberration. That's an outlier. That's more the exception, less the norm, right? If that kind of makes sense. Because for millennials, it's almost like an unwritten rule. After 3 or 4 years, you need to either you get itchy feet.
Yeah.
You naturally want to leave anyway.
Yeah.
You want to try something.
You want to get a pay rise, and you're not going to
pay
get
rise,
it there, and
or there is this view that any longer than that is seen as stagnation, and that is a signaling element that people want to. But anyway, COVID really did bring about that, where people were asking these questions, and I think now the pathways to enlightenment, which is a weird way of saying it, from a job in terms of the satisfaction, you get a different. Now you see a lot of startups happening, and now you see a lot of people glamorizing the most powerful businessmen in the world are from created startups. Like, you know what I mean? And that lifestyle and that alternative is being presented in the mainstream much more than when we started.
And how do you make work fun? Like, it's not these, overlord corporates now that, treat you like, I hate that we say this phrase, but it's a sweatshop and all that type of stuff. And how do you show, like, what's the saying? It's you're not like, the company is not as good as like this is not the saying, but it's like the company is all about the people. It's not about like the tech or whatever it is. The people is what make it.
Yeah.
So how do you bring that to life in order to hilariously get the best people to then drive to your, I guess, agenda, and like which is a business anyway, right? But it's what color paint do you put it on it to make it look appealing?
Yeah, and these are the places and that millennials want to work in, right? Like, and where this was seen as a luxury for previous generations, this is rightly or wrongly kind of seen as a minimum. Or definitely a requirement, right?
Requirement, yeah.
So let's talk about Gen Z. The new millennials, the new Gen Ys. I think of recent have been getting a interesting, like they're basically going through the same growing pains from a media perspective that millennials did back in the day, right? But we're seeing interesting, and I say when we're seeing interesting things, I think whereas we were in the beginning of being digital natives, these
Born into it.
these are genuine. Like TikTok is in their DNA, right?
Yeah.
Like this is a generation that feels empowered straight off the bat and feels that the voice that they have is worth to listen to, which is not a bad thing, by the way. I don't want to make it. I understand how I'm sounding, but I guess what I'm just trying to articulate is, basically the differences between generations and what we are seeing. And I'm conscious that there's a 10% voice that's going to be amplified to 80%, and it's not reflective of the whole.
Yep.
But the things that we see in media there are usually of very strong and opinionated Gen Z. And again, this has to do with the social media element that they use, TikTok specifically, but it's everywhere really. And how things can get quite viral very quickly pertaining to workplaces. And I think what we're seeing is Gen Z have whereas Gen Y were beginning to explore those, what's the word? We're beginning to explore what they felt a job actually meant to them and the things that were requirements there. There's a really heavy expectation or whereas I would say a Gen Y would eat it, would cop it a little bit because you're in that like middle zone there. Look, I have to work this, or I have to work long hours. It's just a known fact, right?
Because you got to, again, if you go back one generation, you see our parents, right?
Yeah.
And they, for lack of a better phrase, ate it, right? Like that's just how it is.
It wasn't even told. It was a known.
Yeah. And you mentioned it, the idea of exploring like the opportunity of like, oh, what could like work look like to kind of be a benefit to me as opposed to me giving to the company.
I'm not saying that that's predominantly, but like
but
big.
But what I'm trying to say is like if you look at our parents, a lot of like this is probably a mass generalization, but it's I think of my parents, and I think of your parents, and it's their job was more of a functional base, if that makes sense. Like it served a purpose to provide.
It depends on the industry and role, but I get what you said.
Yeah. You get what I mean? Yeah. Whereas like for here, it's like for us, it's a matter of like, well, what could a job look like that it's not about necessarily just doing a function just because it's what's valued, but it's something that's of interest to you.
Yeah. I've got an interesting perspective. Oh, you finished.
And then you're looking at Gen Z now that are kind of like, I think these are like the themes that are kind of hitting them, right? It's digital and influencers. Like, how can you make the most money with the less amount of effort possible? A mass generalization.
That could be a generalization, but
a mass generalization, I know, but that's a factor, right? It's about seeing probably previous generations and how much, because that's the case too. When you see from a previous generation what they gone through, you already automatically know what you value
or don't want, right?
Yeah, based on that.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the same thing for this upcoming generation where they've seen us and they're like, yeah, not about that. Or it's all of these things where it's respecting hierarchy all of a sudden from one generation to all of a sudden now feeling like they can actively challenge something.
Yeah.
Based on what? And like I've had instances of this in the workplace where I'm just like, just do what I say because that's how it's done and that's how you get it done. And there's a learning process to all of this and this is how you develop and stuff. But then it's a matter of, well, no, like that doesn't make sense. Like you could do it this way and this way and this way, which in actuality is a strength in itself.
It's not a bad.
It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, but it's just when you're thinking about the intersection now of what people value and how they think about doing work, that's where it gets a bit murky.
So let's talk the connection points because this topic is about connecting to millennials specifically. But if Gen X were the generation that, like you said, there was a very utilitarian function of work. You worked, so you did 10 years in a company, collected that gold Rolex, and whatever happened is whatever happened. Gen Y was in the middle of that in the sense that we wanted a bit more fulfillment from our work.
Yeah.
We saw elements of that. Then we had COVID, we had the GFC that put us into interesting aspects there. And now after COVID, we're now realizing, at least those that are in closer to that end spectrum of Gen Y, that there's maybe a little bit more to life than simply just work, but that career progression and that fulfillment is still important. Again, all straight line generalizations, but for Gen Z, they've come in pure digital native, TikTok straight into the bloodstream, amplification of very strong messages.
Instantaneous. That's probably the little thing I wanted to say. Instantaneous.
And whereas we, Gen Y, have had that realization later, not in the beginning, because I can tell you, for me, that wasn't the beginning at all. It was get a job, pay off that HEX, get a job, show to your parents that all this was worth it. Migrants, we're both migrants.
Yep.
Gen Z don't have to, generalization, comprehend to that. They've got that realization straight off the bat.
Yeah.
We're not 10 years in a work. Hey, I don't want to be like that. Maybe that's not what I'm after. Maybe I'm not after that much money or stuff like that. And the amplification of, even if you were not of that thinking as a Gen Z, but the mediums of media, i.e. TikTok, Instagram, blah, 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 are all perpetuating that. Eventually, you are going to look up to those individuals that are in your age cohort, right?
Yeah.
So how does this affect millennials? Well, we're both people managers in our role, right? Gen Z are in the workforce. So we're seeing this, the new Gen Ys, we're seeing them come up, we're seeing them push back, and inherently there is always a little bit of friction back and forth, styles. But we're seeing, and we're saying, hey, it's not wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't agree with the approach, and definitely, if we did the hard yards, you should be doing those hard yards too. There's definitely elements of that.
Yeah.
But I think whether it happens consciously or unconsciously, by being presented, I don't know how to word this, but not the scapegoat, but like it used to be Gen Ys that used to be viewed as that. Now it's Gen Zs. We can now empathize on both sides and see that there's definitely merit in what you're saying, because I'm feeling a little bit of that, and that's flowing through.
And another example of this, right? As people managers, there is also an aspect of, again, what you experienced going up the ranks and, like, you know, doing the hard time in especially in those younger years. There's been some really shit experiences like that, you know, we're working with people who, again, when your values are at odds, right? It's a matter of, I'm thinking of like some instances where I've had some people, managers who are very gruff, are very abrupt, who don't take the time to actually, you're working with somebody who is fresh, who does not have experience, and then you expect them to understand what you need to do without even showing them it's the time of day and stuff. And arguably that is not a good people manager, right? But it's that thing of, if you've had a shit experience in being managed by someone before, and then all of a sudden you're in that position. And I think that where we can empathize with Gen Zs, because, and maybe it's by virtue of us, what's the word? Like trying to reflect back on ourselves.
Or having been there.
Or something, of having been there, right? It's trying to be relatable to Gen Z is how you can kind of, is always how you, like, how you relate to people, right? Is how you try to bridge the gap. And it's just trying to find ways of, you know, let me get to the point. There is a famous video on Instagram, on the socials effectively, where it's like it's a series of showing the generations in the workforce based on, you know, different things. Like, say it's on a Friday afternoon, right? Where it's like Gen X is still working and just getting to the deadlines. Millennials are kind of, you know, okay, so we got to get this done by 4:00, and then afterwards we can go to the pub. And then Gen Z are already gone. It's like that's probably a point for what we're seeing in media now. But there's a flip side of, I guess, what would be nice to see, I guess, how we try and pay it forward. The idea of being nice and being mindful of people, like, oh, you know, but then the flip side to that is you don't want people taking the piss out of You get what I'm saying? It's that idea of like, what's that line of like, you're trying to be mindful of people's welfare, but then it has to get done. So it's like, it's that bit of like, what's tough love that needs to take place in order for people who may not understand that, you know, work is a place for work. And it's not always about fun times and, you know, memes and like making fun of somebody, you know, like talking shit, whatever it is. It's interesting.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is, again, like how different that realization or that perspective would be on the spectrum of age for millennials. Like if it's still relatively, if you're 28 versus 43. And the irony is, like, we remember how we mention it, but our generation, they look like kids. They still look younger.
Yeah.
The height is not like, again, generalization, but it's a generation that definitely dresses younger. If you're not in a business that you have to wear a suit and stuff like that, you know, especially in media, like you're still wearing sneakers and you close to your 40s, like that's unheard of, right? But we've had like our business heroes, you know, the Zuckerbergs and the Musks of the world do stuff like that, and like it's just different, right?
Yeah, arguably even Steve Jobs with the black
Exactly.
the black turtleneck. That was a strong look, you know.
It's just all different, but like I think it's interesting. I don't know how much more like our, you know, the millennial perspective on work sort of changes, and how much of it is actually not only millennials but all the generations as a whole. But I think we're entering rather a really interesting space in time.
Yeah. It would be easier, hey, if we all valued the same thing, but
That'd be boring too.
Variety be the spice of life.
That's it. What is after Z? What is the next
Alpha?
Age? So what age is that?
I feel like that is our. It would be kids that are in school now.
Okay, Gen Alpha is between 0 and 14 years old.
What are the years? At
2010 and 2024. So
yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's going to be
which
nuts.
is a turbo boost, right?
That's
like I
nuts.
was speaking to a kid. Like we were at a function and I was speaking to a kid, and she was saying that at school now they're learning actively now to type on laptops, right? And that's a completely different like way of learning, the impact of interaction and whatnot. Like whereas, you know, we had to get a handwriting license, a pen license, all of those things where it's like a bit analog, but everything, as you know, everything further gets digitized as we go down that path. Like, can you imagine the impact on interactivity? Like
that's going to be the straight AI generation, which is actually, I think that'll be the generation that Gen Z is still with us in terms of that. But I think Gen Alpha is your first generation of prompt engineers or like very different work, like work roles. Remember when social media manager wasn't a thing? 10 years ago, it wasn't a thing. Maybe even earlier than that. I can't even remember. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It actually wasn't a thing. And now they're actually established roles. So that generation, don't think will be. Yeah, they're going to face very different sort of questions. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting going back down memory lane as well to see how it's all kind of got there.
Respect your elders.
All right, guys, that's the end of this podcast. If you like this this level of this sort of content, leave us some comments.
Tell us your thoughts. What do you think? What are your thoughts of like interactions with different generations? What do you value most in as we progress in work now?
So if you're Gen Y, like, do you agree with our sentiment? Do you think completely off base? You don't feel like that? And if you're Gen Z, how do you feel about it all? Like, do you feel like you've been represented properly? I know we're gonna get smashed.
Also, if you like this format, it would be great to hear what other topics you think it'd be worthwhile getting our thoughts on.
Easy. We've got heaps of different content as well. There's vlogs, there's all that sort of stuff. So subscribe to the channel and we hope to see you next time.
Bye.